What's good, everybody? Sam Boy here, host of It's All Relative podcast. This is my first actual Twitch stream, and yeah, we're gonna see how it goes. I've done a couple other practice streams just to make sure everything was working correctly. Um, I do. So basically, what I do is I do. I'm a commentator. I come in on art, politics, society, the media, entertainment, all that good stuff. And I'm somebody who, I'm in the, political sphere, the left wing, progressive political sphere, you could say. Saying I'm on all the other social medias. You can find me L Samboy, EL, and the SAMBOY. And I'm everywhere as well as my podcast. It's All Relative Podcast. Go check me out wherever you stream. There's also on YouTube video, or you can also watch it on YouTube. And yeah, we're just gonna see how it goes. And today, what I wanted to basically do is there's this game. It's basically a slot game. I think it's also referred to as like a roguelite. Roguelike. I don't know exactly what that means because I'm really not into the gaming that much. But it's like when in Rome, speak Greek or whatever the fuck. Yeah, when in Rome, speak Greek. So basically, what I'm gonna do today is be playing this game called Luck Be A Landlord. The premise is supposed to be that you're playing a slot game and you are basically trying to outplay your landlord, and you get different endings if you can make it to the end. They've been making a bunch of patches and updates to it, making the game a lot more difficult and making the game more in depth, which I enjoy. And yeah, it's a fun little game, and I have a video that I wanted to show that I published, I think, a month and a half or so ago. It's the problem with rent control, where I discuss rent control and use a bunch of different examples and talk about some alternatives. So it's basically going to be a combination initially of me just playing this game and showing you this video that I recorded, and yeah, and then going from there. And the video itself, my video that I made is about an hour. I won't show the whole thing because I want to be able to talk about some other subjects after that, some other events and whatnot that have gone on. But that's going to be the premise so far. And so we're just going to see how it goes. This is my first, like I said, Twitch live stream. I've done other, live, recordings and whatnot. So we'll just see what happens. Was watching Hassan. I was watching some fucking Hassan, and yeah, he's very, very, very based. And oh no, did I shut it down? Why did I do that? Um. Okay, let's go ahead and move that down over here. And I don't need Twitch up right now. It's good to see that it's functioning. I don't need that up right now though. Got the Streamlab there, and hell, what the hell must I look? Okay, here we go. Now this game, it normally does have its own music, but I just turned the music down for obvious reasons because I want y'all to be able to focus on my video, which has its own sounds and different musical clips and whatnot. But I'm keeping the sound effects on. And we're going to go to the main menu where you're going to start a new game. This was one of the modifications that they made. If you were playing the game earlier on, you didn't get there wasn't this whole apartment floor, which allows for different modifiers and whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and select that, and then start. And here's what it says: enjoy your stay in your new apartment, in our new apartment complex. It comes with a complimentary slot machine. Go figure. Right? You can use it to get coins and pay your rent. Speaking of which, your rent is 25 coins and is due in 5 spins. Good luck, your landlord. Landy_McLandlord at bounty.mail. And yeah, scroll down if you need to. And up here, as you'll see, well, we'll get to the next screen already. And so yeah, it's a slot game. Oops. So it's a slot game, and you get your 5 columns right here. And you get that, the choice to spin. We start off with 1 coin, and the thing about it is that these items will, they have different features. They'll be able to play off of one another, and you'll see that as we go along. And down here, we just have the, options which you can go and fiddle with the different settings and whatnot. And and then inventory, which will show empty spaces, all the different items that you have on the board, as well as the ones that you collect further down, as well as some other things that will come up as you go along. So starting off, damn it. My first time, folks, my first time. So yeah, so this is my video, the problem with rent control, and this is the intro. I'll show y'all real quick. So for anybody who follows politics and history, or just has a basic level of awareness for their surroundings, you may have noticed that many countries today have been plagued by two major social dilemmas that aren't COVID-19. One has been homelessness, which is skyrocketed everywhere effectively, and two, affordable housing, which is cratered, becoming less and less available as real estate prices effectively shut out anybody who has to actually work for a living. Now, these have been persistent issues in societies around the world and throughout time. Oh yeah, so as I was saying, that it's very much based on like modifications on these different traits, and I guess this is where like the roguelike description comes in. And essentially, you will see an item, you will see how much coins it gives you on the spin. You will also see how rare it is. All of these items are common because we just started the game, and or just started this match, I should say, started these rounds. And under each one, it will show any extra information. So for this one, like the toddler, like the milk has no other modifications, which I would think that it would actually be something like it would enhance with the toddler, because the toddler, when it is adjacent to candy, piñatas, or bubbles, it will modify how much coins they give. So the bubble normally gives 2, but if a baby is adjacent to it, it will, the bubble itself destroys itself after giving coins 3 times. So after you get 6 coins from the bubble, it will self-destruct essentially. The piñata, it will add 5 candies when it's destroyed, and the candies will give 1 each by themselves. Now, the toddler, when it's adjacent to one of these items, for the candy, it will give 6 additional coins for candy. It will give 6 additional coins for destroying a piñata, and the piñata is still going to make those extra 5 candy, which the baby can eat and give you more coins. And then the bubble, it will also give an additional 6 coins. So you get 6 coins on top of the 6 that the bubble gives you already. Well, that's if it only pops on the 3rd time. If it pops before the 3rd time, obviously you only get that first bonus and the initial 2, the 2 for that turn with the bubble. The milk, you get nothing, and then the seed has a 25 chance of growing into one of these other pieces of produce. And of course, there's other modifications that will come along. I won't stop and break down each and every one. If you want to, later on, like pause the video, and as it goes along, I'll upload it to YouTube and everything. Then you can, do that. And if you feel like you want to spend 15, 20 bucks on it, it's a decent little game, decent little waste of time. Let's focus. Let's get back to this video. But special focus should always be given to these nations which are considered industrialized or post-industrialized, because they are known to possess enough resources to outright end most of these social dilemmas, but they routinely fail to do so. And it should be said again and again that the COVID-19 pandemic and the response by many of our nation's leaders has exacerbated these issues further, pushing many already desperate people over the edge into poverty, homelessness, and long-term unemployment. In the United States, where I reside, we've had arguably one of the worst responses to the pandemic, with little to no help or guidance from our political leadership under the former Trump administration.
More deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%, so this is deadly stuff. I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
In the GOP majority. And this is something that needs to be repeated, and we can't just let it, be waved off. Is that the reason why we are still in this situation, whereas other countries like Vietnam and South Korea, or Australia, New Zealand, Cuba, and tons of other countries around the world have gotten their shit together, is because the leadership took it seriously. They weren't trying to downplay it either for political clout or because they were just themselves being anti-science. you know what I'm saying, we are dealing with this situation in the U.S. a year and a half, damn near a year and a half into it. And even though we're in the best situation we've been at thus far, it should have never even gotten to this level. And it needs to be reminded that when people want to talk about it, like, oh, damn this vaccine and shit, or excuse me, damn this COVID-19. Listen, you know, don't be so vague. It's the response to the disease. Viruses and diseases and shit have always been present. It's all about having the resources, the information, and the tenacity of actually being able to tackle the issue and not ignoring it or playing it down. We live in a time and a place where we are abundant in all of these domains and all of these means of tackling these issues. And in addition to these, you know, there's been other, you know, efforts made by the GOP and by Trump, to completely undermine the effort of curbing the impact of COVID-19. And yeah, you know, and it's not something that should be waved off or just pitted as a 50-50 issue. No, there was one side and certain individuals that were far more responsible for this than anybody else. Not to mention living in a culture that's obsessed with individual freedoms, conspiracy theories, and alternative sources of information on every single topic that you can think of. As a result, nearly 545,000 unnecessary deaths have occurred, and more are still counting, because it's going to take time for the Biden administration's COVID relief bills to actually start to have their effects. And we've already been dealing with this pandemic for a year and 4 months up to this point, and they've been in office for less than 3 months. And while the Biden administration Democrats have moved faster to provide more significant relief measures for U.S. residents, they still fall largely short of the needs of the people. And this is because we've been living in substandard conditions for decades, and just getting back to normal means accepting less than what we are truly owed through our labor and consumption. As a result, we've seen the So sorry to cut myself off for a second, but this is one of the more interesting pieces, and you get it early on, or pieces, I guess, items that you get. It's the thief. Now they've made some modifications to you know, the way in which it distributes coins and whatnot. Sorry if I'm a little slurry and whatnot. It's like I'm definitely buzzing. I've got myself finishing off this little drink here. I'll probably crack open another one, and I've been smoking. I've been drinking. But the thief, who, you know, that's an item that's available early on in the game, as you can tell, used to give like it would take a coin, right? So he gives -1 coin. He's basically taking a coin away from you and accumulating as they go along. And then once the thief is destroyed, you know, by interacting with other items, it would give you like 2 times or 3 times or 4 times or whatever it was of what they stole. So if they stole like 10 and they got destroyed, then they would give you like 30 or 40 or whatever it was. I don't remember. It's been a while since I actually played this game. But now they've changed it to, they give a mystery amount when destroyed, and the mystery amount increases by 4 each spin. So each spin he's going to take 1, and then each spin the amount he gives is going to increase by 4. So like by 5 spins he will have stolen 4, and when he gets destroyed, he'll give you, I guess, 20. He'll give you 20, and he stole 5, so ultimately that'll net you plus 15. We'll see how that goes, but I normally like the thief. I pick him up whenever I can, and so we're gonna do that. Oswald the monkey could be useful if we get, you know, enough like bananas and coconuts and other shit. Oh, this is interesting. The lunchbox now is giving chemical 7, which was before it would give all these other items, alcohol, food, and produce, but now this one was more like a there's like a random, like, it was just like its own kind of item. This is interesting, though, but this is also one of my favorite items, so we're going to go ahead and pick that up and continue on with the game. And as we were showing, and one more thing on the show is that, oh yeah, this is our money that we have at each turn. It doesn't show which turn we're on. Payments, 1 out of 12 symbols. Yeah, it doesn't show. I guess you just kind of have to mentally keep track of it, what spin you're on. Oh, I guess it'll show you after each spin, right? Yeah, and as you can see, the baby ate up that bubble, gave the additional 6, and then the bubble for existing on that turn gave us the 2. So we didn't reach it to the 3rd turn, which would have given us 12 altogether, but we still got 10, which is not bad. All right, back to me. Acting of and more calls for rent control measures across the world. This is an attempt to make affordable housing more readily available for unhoused or housing insecure residents. This is also due to a fact that's underreported, but I think should be given more clout when discussing this issue, is that many unhoused people actually continue to work or otherwise trade their labor for some kind of income. I think this really brings into focus just how stark this situation is when those who are actually working and actually trying to be productive citizens are literally priced out of the situation. It really disrupts the narrative that, oh, people just need to get off their butts and just need to be more productive, and oh, you see this other person over here that's willing to do this, this, and that. You know, it's like you don't know what somebody else is already doing. You don't know what kind of effort somebody's putting in to make the little bit of living that they are. And that should be given more sensitivity than just allowing somebody to brush them off and say, oh, it's whatever, it's somebody else's problem. It's all of our problems. So I'm going to skip this term because I don't see anything that I really like or that creates a lot of synergy with the other items, whether it's the one that's on the board or the ones that I normally end up picking up. And this is very useful. Sometimes it is in your best interest to skip, because once you start taking up more room on the board, on the slot machine, then it makes it harder for you to get those synergies going. So it's like it's a fine balance of making sure you want to get as many pieces to get as many synergies, but making sure that it doesn't become so sparse and so rare that they play off of one another that you end up losing the game really early, or you end up losing, right? After all, we're trying to pay our rent. And I think we still got a couple of turns before we have to pay. We're already at 37. I guess, increases by... Okay, let's spin again, because I think this is showing that, what he'll give once he's destroyed. And... Okay, I get it. I'm going to go ahead and skip again, because I don't like these symbols either. So I guess this is showing what he'll give once he's destroyed, and that as he's going along, you'll see that he's taking one. Okay, all right, back to me. And this ultimately brings me to the inspiration for this video. The source of this, which is a Twitter thread that I ran across about, I think, a month ago, either March 2nd or March 3rd, and discusses rent control measures that were enacted by a left-wing coalition government in Berlin, Germany in 2019. So let's go through it. Okay, so the Twitter thread in question comes from one Andreas. Wait, why are my viewers hidden? In their description, say that they are a columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. Now, for anybody that follows news and politics and whatnot, you will recognize Bloomberg as being a mainstream and long-standing media source. It's very, pro-establishment, or, it will be critical of the establishment as much as it can. But for the most part, it's going to be a center-left to a center-right media source. Andreas Kluth doesn't give away his political or cultural, persuasion, but you can kind of suss out where he's coming from. He's a columnist at Bloomberg. I think I just said that. He was also previously an editor-in-chief of Handelsblatt Global, which I looked it up. It's a German-based and German language business and finance periodical, and business and industry and finance tends to have a right-wing bias, no matter if you want to cut it in being just slightly center-right or being far-right or libertarian right. It's almost always to the right. That doesn't mean that business and economics and finance are important things that leftists and progressives shouldn't take seriously and come up with their own coherent arguments. Anyway, also spending 20 years at The Economist, I follow The Economist. They undoubtedly have a right wing, at the very least being center-right, very pro-business, very pro-finance. That shouldn't be surprising. But I do find them to be pretty coherent and pretty consistent and pretty objective in the way that they discuss various issues. So that's Andreas Kluth. He wrote this article from Bloomberg, and it's discussing, as I mentioned, the left-leaning coalition government of Berlin, Germany, introducing unprecedented rent controls, which were implemented in 2020, about a full year ago. He says that lots of economists warned against it. So what do the numbers say now? A thread. And that's the article in question. Berlin's rent controls are proving to be a disaster. And we'll go over a couple of details in that in just a moment. But in this thread, so firstly, he discussed what the policy is. If you look down first, before we discuss what's going on, you'll see that the policy, it was announced between 2019 and 2020, and then actually enacted in the early part of 2020. Let's go back up. The legislation split Berlin's housing into two different factions. You have one that's regulated and capped in residencies that were built before 2014, and then the unregulated and uncapped facilities that were built since 2014. And he even highlights here that in the regulated market, as expected, and as it's cited in many other reports that have been done on rent controls over the decades, rents plummet relative to those in other cities. So going back to this graph, you'll see that Berlin rents relative to the next 13 largest German cities was rising quite a bit, and started to fall after this policy was announced. And then right before it was implemented, it didn't quite nosedive. It seems to have plateaued at about 60%, which means that the rate of growth, from what I understand here, I'm not an economist, I'm not a statistician, but the way that I understand this graph to say is that if Berlin rents were growing, relative to all these other cities, now its pace of growth has pretty much plateaued at being about 40% relative to what it was. So effectively, the rates in Berlin you will find are, I guess, 40% on average greater, as opposed to, they're going to see a 40% difference in the rents, as opposed to seeing, a much greater difference. Like I said, I'm not a professional with this shit. I'm just a regular guy who's trying to really understand this shit on a better level. Yeah, and looking back on it, looking at it right now, I mean, it's clearly dropped down to 60. I don't know why I was saying 40. My math was not right. I think I wasn't looking at this right. I think I would need somebody who's like a statistician or like an economist to actually break the shit down. However, I mean, this isn't like I'm not going to sit here and act like it's defeating my arguments later on. It was just me misunderstanding what this graph here was showing. Like, if it was growing, the policy enacted, the growth fell. So whatever growth it was happening, in the difference between it and the 13 next largest German cities, after it was regulated, that growth fell by 60%. So I guess that's why I was saying it was still rising by 40%, because the difference between that and 100 would be like, okay, 40. So I think that's where I was coming from. Like I said, I'm not a professional with this shit. I'm just a regular guy who's trying to shows it right here, really understand this shit on a better level. He goes on to discuss that the excess demand has to go somewhere, so the rents in the unregulated market start soaring. This is also something that's well documented in tons of other rent control research over the decades. I should have actually got the policy was announced again and I should have got the bounty hunter, because in the very next turn I have to have 100. There's no symmetries or synergies that I have that could possibly give me that right now. I should have gotten the bounty hunter when I had the chance. I didn't, because I was hoping that I'd still be able to make rent a little bit more, and then be able to really cash out on the thief when he was maybe getting me like at least like 3 figures, at least 100. But that's how it goes. So after this turn we'll start up another game, another round, and keep this video going. To rise, and then went down a little bit, and the policy was enacted and has continued to grow at a certain pace. We're getting evicted. Then the landlords have the comparison of the value of regulated apartments versus the unregulated ones, where relative to how they were before, you could say that the unregulated housing hasn't seen too big of a difference. They had one spike, one severe pattern of growth, but it seems to have evened out for the most part. But the regulated housing has shown a very distinct negative pattern, falling down 10% in total value. The disaster becomes clear in the next 2 charts, and this is something that's also highlighted in the reason why these phenomena happen, rent sinking markets and whatnot, is that the tenants whom are already in rent controlled apartments, they no longer move. They've been grandfathered in. And when they still do, the landlords, instead of saying, okay, we have to outfit this to be a rent-regulated apartment, and that's going to cap the potential income that I could get from it, I'd much rather just turn this into a luxury condo, because that doesn't have to follow the same rules, or turning it into a commercial property, or just selling it off to somebody else. Essentially, what happens is that the supply, the listings of unregulated flats, has frozen up, and this is a great point, because again, this is something that happens, but really the difference between somebody who's left wing or progressive or even just liberal versus somebody who is center right to the right wing or far right or a libertarian is the solutions to this. But before we get there, let's go a little bit further. And so you can see here that the supply in the regulated market has fell, and I don't know if that's 50% or by like 50 points exactly or whatnot. But in the next 13 largest cities, it has remained fairly neutral. But there's been a very distinct pattern in the availability of listings in the regulated market. And then finally, well, not finally, the second to last finally, second to finally, but then also the people in the newer apartments also don't want to move, because where to? So supply in the unregulated market can't increase fast enough. Again, a lot of this comes down to simple supply and demand. If you are in a regulated apartment and whatnot, you're like, oh shit, even if I want to move, I'm not going to be able to afford any of the other spots that are out there, and somebody's just going to come and take this spot and I won't be able to get it back because they're going to want to just sit on it. And again, that creates a very real issue of supply and leaving a lot of people really stuck in place. And you can see here the extra supply of unregulated units can't pick up with the slack. Again, the unregulated ones, you can see the listings going up slightly, and in the next 13 largest cities, starts to, it's falling a little bit towards the end there. And then the conclusion that Andreas leaves us with is that one group gets a windfall, tenants already in rent-controlled units, even rich ones, they're going to be fine, they're going to keep the shit, they're going to just sit on it until the day that they die, or possibly even pass it on to a loved one or a close family friend or whatever. And effectively all others lose. People who are just getting out of college, people who just moved to a city,
thought I was gonna lose
immigrants, new families, everybody. They can't find a decent place to live. And then he says, Deckel equals disaster. And I'm guessing that Deckel is the policy that was enacted by the coalition government. And then he gives a couple of parting comments and whatnot. And I want to jump over to the article that they wrote. So before we get into that next part, and I'm probably going to skip a little bit because I don't want to spend, because this video is an hour. So this video is an hour, but I don't want to spend one whole hour just going over this video. I would like, those who see this to go and watch it and give it your full attention instead of being distracted by the other shit that's going on. Plus there's other events that I want to get into. But here's another thing that was added some time ago. This was definitely on there one of the last times that I played, but that they've introduced the idea, because again, this is supposed to be like a anti-capitalist, very, communist, anarchist, ethos to the game. And so you have the presence of now a local, they address you, hello comrade, your local mutual aid network has heard of your rent situation. To help with your trials, we are giving you 2 of these green dots, which can be used to add from a new selection of symbols. So you basically get to basically like re-roll on the symbols you get if you don't like them instead of having to skip them. Or these these black dots or gray dots, when you can remove something from your inventory, which is different than destroying it, but it still gives you a space on your board. If something is destroyed, that means it won't have an effect on the gameplay at all, where if something is just removed from your inventory, it can still have an effect on the other items that are in play. So commie _ midcomrade@bounty.mail. Okay, like all of these hexes, I hate all of these hexes. I don't use them. I mean, they do add some challenge to the game, but I'm not looking for challenge right now because this game already has a pretty decent difficulty curve, and you have 12 levels to try to pay the rent, and shit can, because this is a slot game, it's largely dependent on just luck of the draw. You could have 10 things in there that are supposed to play off of one another, but if they don't actually do so with each roll and you miss your rent, then it doesn't fucking matter, right? That Andreas wrote, because they did write this. Go and use one of these. My Berlin rent controls are proving to be a disaster. A year ago, the leftist government of Germany's capital region imposed central planning on the city's housing market. That was a bad move, according to Andreas. So let's go a little further down into the article, because there's a couple things that he brings up that I think, again, deserve to be emphasized. And so the policy took effect about a year ago in March of 2020, and it was a rent cap. This is a strict ceiling on rents, how much you can charge, point blank period, no flexibility for, growth or changing situations. And for all apartments built before 2014, rents were frozen at whatever they were on June 18, 2019. And then also tenants in those units could force landlords to lower rents defined as excessive. It's like that's great. There should be the ability for tenants to be able to challenge the change in the rents and be able to negotiate that with landlords, kind of like being able to, if arbitration actually worked more in favor of the employee in business situations, in corporate situations, instead of just favoring the corporates, corporate, I should say. And he says that this reform came courtesy of the city-state's red-green-red governing coalition between the 3 left-leaning blocs in the German political spectrum:
Ukraine or
the Social
Russia.
Democrats,
Kyrgyzstan
the
won.
Green Party.
I don't understand what you mean.
Which is an ambiguous term, which I guess is described here as being the remnants of the post-Soviet Communist Party of the Eastern Bloc. So basically post-Soviet or post-Stalin, the Eastern Bloc and whatnot, trying to pick up the pieces after he completely fucked their shit up. Stalin, that is. And discussing a little bit, more things here, far outstrips supply. And on one hand, this could be gentrification, this is foreign investment, this is just other private domestic. And the people inside that matter are not just the workers, not just the consumers, not just the renters. And, we got to think it's better for tenants. Then for the most part, I'm with it. But the issues that Andreas brings up here, and that has been brought up in plenty of other studies over the decades, are things that leftists and progressives genuinely have to come up with critical arguments in addressing. Because tenants are not the only people who bring value in society. The only people inside that matter are not just the workers, not just the consumers, not just the renters. And, we got to think about investors. We got to think about developers. We got to think about all these other elements. So I want to go down a little further. And, essentially what he, points out is that, we can all recognize what the issue is that the underlying problem was real. Rent in Berlin, a place that was once proud of being grungy and affordable, has soared in recent years as demand from new arrivals far outstrips supply. And on one hand, this could be gentrification, this is foreign investment, this is just other private domestic interests that are just, just eating up all of the available property that they can and giving less options for regular citizens that have to work in and around the city. Now, again, the difference comes in the way in which we solve this issue and who we put the blame on. The last thing that I wanted to bring up here is, it splits the market into two factions. What was the last thing I wanted to say? Yes. Part of the reasons why we have to consider all these different elements is because all these other factions are not going anywhere. And as Andreas points out here, the price changes in the regulated market dropped relative to those in the 13 other cities because real estate loses value if the future anticipated cash flows to landlords or private interest corporations, foreign, blah, 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 blah. Whoever owns the property, if it's capped, they're less likely to reinvest in that property, or they're going to find ways to skirt the laws so that way they can get the most profit out of the arrangement. There was also an acceleration of apartments going up for sale as landlords tried to cash out of their now less profitable investments. Price increases in the unregulated market outpaced those. We went over that. But that trend isn't as clear in this segment because investors worry that rent controls could be extended to younger buildings in the future. So this creates anxiety, and this affects, long-term, economic and financing goals. Because the whole thing about being a regular working person or being a laborer, being a renter and whatnot, is that you are living month to month. You only make moves based on, very short increments. But society and the system cannot just be arranged or organized on that basis alone. And so this is when I want to get into some of the solutions and some of the ways in which we can possibly remedy these issues that Andreas doesn't seem to be able to come up with on their own. So, a left-wing coalition government implemented strict rent control measures in a major European city. We do have to worry about providing adequate housing. We do have to worry austerity for public programs such as supplemental food and infrastructure investments or housing and job programs and bulking up the income residents. Their observations about All right, so I skipped over a little bit of me summarizing that article and why things happen like that, and some of the broad understandings of rent control and the ways in which it is either worked in favor of, to its, in the way in which its supporters have found success in the programs, and also being real about the failures and criticisms of it. And then I move on to this next section, which is providing 3 examples of government social housing programs from vastly different governments, different countries, and they've been going on for different periods of time, and they show different models for how the government can really get involved with this stuff. I do talk about how non-government related groups and cooperatives can participate, but this is mainly, my main thing is I'm not a communist. I'm not an anarchist. I definitely believe in a state, a government. I believe that there should be people whom have, an overwhelming influence, a monopoly of violence, you could say, in these different situations. And they can, and that pushing them, that we hold them accountable, the citizens, hopefully, in making sure that they actually provide, programs and services that the people need. And, people talk often about like how the government is in the pocket of corporations and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, yes. And let's get lobbying money out of there. Lobbying doesn't just include big bad corporations. It also includes, labor unions, and, basically it includes all different unions. It includes different, groups, people who work in various trades and industries, whatever, at different levels, whom decide they pull their money, their resources, and their connections together, and they say, hey, we're pulling the strings, the leverage. And because while the citizenry, while generally a lot of people may feel a certain way about different programs and services, it really comes down to who's putting up the money, who's showing up at the meetings, and who is making noise and calling people out. You know what I'm saying, and putting the pressure on them. And so here I'm just going into 3 government examples that I could find that provide a model for government interventionism in the homelessness and affordable housing crises. 3 high-profile examples, international examples that I want to use. And this is courtesy of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. It's in the name for managing the public housing infrastructure in the United States. Here's their observations about Vienna's unique social housing program. The city of Vienna, Austria, famous for its rich cultural and architectural heritage, is also recognized for its unique social housing program. In practice for nearly a century, Vienna's social housing system is known as an effective and innovative model for providing superior affordable housing to the city's residents.
Goes on a little bit more, blah, 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 blah.
But the real meat of the issue is down here. This researcher, Lindstrom, explained that Vienna's, let me go ahead and highlight this for y'all so y'all can see it better. Lindstrom explained that Vienna's city government, oh shit, it pulls up the source. I mean, that's really resourceful, that's really nice, but not what I'm looking for. Lindstrom explained that Vienna's city government owns and manages 220,000 housing units, which represents about 25% of the city's total housing stock. These are called social housing and meant primarily for low-income residents. The city also indirectly controls 200,000 units that are built and owned by limited profit private developers, but developed through a city-regulated process. Okay, so real quick, back to the game. You might have noticed that. So again, all of these games. So again, I guess this is where like the roguelike element comes into play. In that, you saw that vase that cracked open because it was adjacent to the hooligan. So the hooligan destroys it. And yeah, that's what they do. That's what the hooligan does. No extra bonuses, but it does destroy these urns. Otherwise, the urns will only give you 1 per turn. But once the urn is destroyed, and unlocks a spirit. A spirit is considered a rare item, where the urn, I think, is like a common or uncommon item. And they give you 4 each turn. Now, the spirits do self-destruct after 4 times, but there's also like another item, I forget what it's called, which actually prevents the death or prevents spirits from self-destructing. And so this was a smaller spirit. There's also a larger spirit. But if you find that other item, then you create one of the best like synergies, one of the better synergies in the game, where they continue to give you 4 coins each turn, which is really a really good item. Yeah, it's sweet. So yeah, urns are a regular urn is common. A big urn is uncommon. And then the tombstone is rare and has a 5% chance of adding spirits. Okay. Back to me. And this is really what I'm talking about right here. Dig this. So Vienna adopted the latter approach in the 1980s, so it's really recent, when it decided to collaborate with the private sector to build affordable housing rather than just developing and owning more public housing on their own. Kind of spread out the liability there, and also, take the opportunity to, get some, alternative sources of funding. The city buys land deemed suitable for residential development and retains control over the type and nature of the development. The city then solicits proposals from various private developers who then build and retain ownership of the housing units. A jury evaluates these proposals based on 4 criteria: architecture, environmental performance, social sustainability, and economic parameters such as proposed, rent levels and costs. After the jury is selected, the city sells the land to the developer at an affordable price. In addition, the city gives the developer a loan with favorable terms such as low interest rates and extended repayment periods. Private developers who collaborate with the city government to build affordable housing must allow the city to rent half, that's 50%, of the new apartments to lower income residents. The developer, in turn, generally leases the remaining units to moderate income residents. In some projects, future tenants participate in the planning, design, and construction process and give input on what kind of facilities they would like to have in the building. That's basically all the points that I just brought up. There's another layer to this, which makes it the model which many other countries have tried to emulate with different levels of success.
So check this out.
The rents are regulated by the city government so that none of the residents pay any more than 20 to 25% of their household income for housing, compared to the corresponding 30% benchmark in the U.S. A unique feature of Vienna's social housing program is that the city's income restrictions for subsidized units only apply when families first move in. Residents are never required to move out even if household income levels increase in the following years. That means if you come in there and you're only making, say $15,000 a year, and you go into the the government public housing, and 3 years later you're making $30,000 a year. Your rent doesn't change. You don't have to hide or lie about the money that you're making. You are able to still keep that arrangement that you had. This arrangement results in a number of moderate income residents living in subsidized housing, and this mixing together of residents with different income levels helps with social integration, or social cohesion as it may be printed in some sources. Since the city has a large stock of affordable housing, these middle-income residents typically do not crowd out lower income residents. And this has been going on for over a century, like they said, and I think it started off in the beginning, they owned as much as 30%, and now it seems to be a still pretty significant portion, because if 220,000 homes, or units, represent 25 of the city's housing stock, and then you indirectly control another 200,000. I mean, that sounded to me like that's almost half of the units that the city has some level of control over. And I'm not really mad at that. Just really interesting. So that, unfortunately, folks, we just got evicted again. That's one model. Now, there's actually a much more recent model, and this is courtesy of World Bank blogs, and it's, but what about Singapore? Lessons from the best public housing program in the world. Now, the explanations here are a little bit more succinct, but Singapore has a long-standing reputation for cleanliness, for appeal to tourists, and for high levels of sustainability and just, aesthetics and whatnot.
So let's go down here and see.
And basically what they're talking about is, some people were, there's some type of forum that was going on about how to address the issues of affordable housing and sustainability and whatnot. And somebody was going in inquiring about how to improve the situation in Latin America. And I guess one of the respondents said, hey, what about Singapore? And we can say Singapore case is the sui generis and non-replicable. Oh, man.
Sui generis. Sui generis. Sui generis.
And we would say that the Singapore case is too sui generis and non-replicable. Yeah, well, let's see what they have to say about that.
Wow. Okay, so it is hard to believe today, but in 1947, the British Housing Committee reported that 72% of a total population of 938,000 of Singaporeans were living in the 80 square kilometers that made up the central city area. Holy shit. When Singapore attained self-governance in 1959, only 9% of Singaporeans resided in public housing. Today, 80% of Singaporeans live in a government-built apartment. There are about 1 million Housing and Development Board apartments, largely clustered in 23 self-contained new towns that extend around the city's coastal core. Damn. That is amazing. So let's go down to what makes this so important. I already highlighted the part that I wanted to show y'all, but the first point that they make in this report is the importance of neighborhoods. So a Stanford economist goes in there and talks about how the quest for design of inclusivity and sustainability requires the careful bottom-up design of neighborhoods, and it matters a lot. They say that poorly designed public housing in cities ranging from the infamous projects in New York, and the banlieues of Paris have resulted in creating poverty ghettos that intensify and amplify inequalities and fuel social unrest. Many of these have had to be demolished. What has Singapore done to get this right? The housing estates are carefully designed with mixed income housing in mind, each having access to high quality public transport and education, and the famous Singapore hawker centers where all income classes and ethnicities meet, socialize, play, and dine together. Wow, at least 2 such hawker stalls have a Michelin star. Wow, okay, I don't even know exactly what those are, but they sound like, just public. I don't know any real, like, just public plazas or public spaces that are described. What if this is what I'm thinking of, if it's just like a general public space, just above like a food cart in the parking lot and shit, but not quite a full, high class plaza, for 2 little hawker stalls, food stalls, I'm guessing, to have Michelin stars is nothing to sneeze at. Nothing to sneeze at. But basically, that whole spirit of, as they put it, kampong, or social cohesion, and common corridors, or what's referred to as common areas, this forces people of different backgrounds to interact, and this makes them feel as if they're all integrated in the same community, and no one group has more priority or more importance than the other. And this is something that was pointed out in the Vienna model, and I think this is a very consistent commonality that we can see that is important when keeping in mind how to improve social cohesion along with sustainability and urban efficiency. So here's another thing that's unique to Singapore and also to Vienna to a certain degree, because they're both smaller nations. So the use of urban density. So Singapore planners, constrained by limited land, chose to build up. And one of the key points here about Singapore and the fact that it is known as a garden city is that the buildings are interspaced with high quality green open spaces. In other words, they will alternate between building up, buildings that rise and whatnot, and then leaving certain amounts of green open spaces that are not going to be developed to any degree. They're going to be maintained as they are because aesthetics and beauty and having something beautiful to look at and engage with is key to making people feel, again, engaged and belonging into the community. All right. Okay, so now here's actually a big thing, and this is where the real legalese comes into play. So an integrated approach to housing, from planning and design through land assembly and construction to management and maintenance. So check this out. The Housing and Development Act in 1960 gave the Housing and Development Board the lead role across the housing value chain. And remember, this place, they just got their freedom. Singapore just got their freedom in 1959. And one of the first things they decided to do was, we need to take control of all the housing and management of the land and take control of this whole food chain and whatnot. And so this is actually that word again, sui generis. Really what it means is that, it's something that's so unique in particular to a particular situation or circumstances or place that it is not easily replicable, if it's replicable at all. Singapore, as was just described earlier, is a nation that, acquired its land. Acquired its own, sovereignty and autonomy in the middle of the 20th century, when other countries like the U.S. and many others have had independence for centuries. And they have plenty of examples to see, how other industrialized and post-industrialized societies were struggling with this issue. And so one of the first things that they did was they established, they rewrote all these rules and said that, hey, most of the land here is literally run by us. We are going to look out for our citizens, look out for our people, and make sure that we're not struggling with this issue as many other nations with more resources and more power and influence and everything struggle to this day. In most countries, access to land for affordable housing is a critical constraint. In Singapore in 1967, the Land Acquisition Act empowered the country to acquire land at a low cost for public use. Today, 90% of the land is owned by the state, as opposed to 49% in 1965, which was only 6 years, again, after they had been freed, emancipated from the British, from the English. There was great emphasis placed on standardization and efficiencies in construction management. Because when you run all this shit, then anybody who wants to develop on your stuff or collaborate with you has to follow your oversight. And for example, merit stars were awarded to contractors who performed consistently well. For every merit star earned, the contractor would enjoy a 0.5% bidding preference when tenders were evaluated. In 1982, a core contractor scheme was introduced under which contractors with a minimum paid up capital of 500,000, I'm guessing that's Singaporean dollars, and a minimum of 5 stars attained from the merit star scheme are offered a guaranteed annual workload for a fixed number of years. So again, those incentive programs getting developers and investors to, play by the rules, but then getting some real tangible benefits from that. Mention the term public housing or housing estate, and the vision that comes to mind is one of decrepit, poorly maintained ghettos. Singapore housing estate, as far as you can get from this dystopian vision. They are immaculately maintained. In 1989, town councils were introduced to empower local elected representative and residents to run their own estates. You get that? From the government running this stuff, they allow town councils, which would give representatives and residents, the community, the ability to say, okay, we're handing this over to you. You cater to the needs of your specific community, to your community, and the housing needs and desires that they are, putting towards. Today, there are 16 town councils managing the Housing and Development, Bureau, housing estates in Singapore. I know it was back up there, but I'm not going back up there to see what it is. But in any case, you get the gist of the story here. Long-term and strong political commitment. Harvard economist Ed Glazier once said that Harvard economist Ed Glazier once said that economics offers tactics, not strategy, which means that politics must decide what level of support, say, public housing will receive. Again, one of the other important things that needs to be there is that, even though a lot of issues can be described as being partisan ones, and especially in the U.S., Republicans definitely stand against, public housing to certain degrees, as well as like SNAP programs and, job programs and other stuff like that. But, Singapore is like a neoliberal bastion, and they had a strong anti-communist and anti-socialist, a very violent, push, killing tons of people associated with those party and political social movements. And yet they still enacted a policy that in many circles would be considered left wing. Just goes to show that some things are not necessarily partisan. It's just about, do you genuinely care about about actually fulfilling your promises, or having, actually making life better for your constituency, and the ways in which you go about doing that. Public housing, offering good quality public housing, is about the actual leadership. Who is it that wants it? You can be a conservative, be a Republican or right winger, and still take that shit seriously and actually, enact those policies. Obviously, I would just prefer if somebody left wing or progressive or even slightly liberal would do that instead. But that's the thing that it comes down to. It's not just about resources, not just about power and connections. It's actually about, do you have it? Do the leaders actually have it in them to make that call? Or are they going to just, go with the easy, or are they going to go with some, the other options? Only then can economics advise the most efficient way to provide this support. There's been strong political and public support for public housing in Singapore that has been stable, and this has meant a high level of public subsidies to the HDB. In 2017, this was 1.19 billion Singaporean dollars. Now, let it also be said that Singapore is a neoliberal bastion. It has a long history of successfully stifling communist and socialists' interests in the country. Now, in spite of that, they still found a way to implement programs which some supposed socialist countries, or Marxist-Leninist countries, as some may like to refer to them as, have still not been able to implement, or at least not even come close to the same level. So this goes to show again that it comes down to a certain level of resources, and whom are the people that are actually in power, what is it that they really want, and how passionate are they about actually getting these things done, having the willpower. Now, the third example I want to use, and this is a great example, it's when it comes in Chile, but it's less of a specific program and more of one instance when a developer was contracted to make the best use of this land, and it's a very interesting story and how it plays out. But this stream is already getting to be almost an hour, and like I said, I want to move ahead. If you want to see all the other details and every instance, which I mentioned to defend the arguments, you should just go YouTube. It's All Relative Podcast. The problem with rent control? El Samboy, and peep the thing yourself. But let's go ahead and move. Brilliant. So in addition to these three examples of more government stewardship of the land and property management, there's also the option of offering subsidized government loans to tenants and emergency permitting in residencies that would otherwise take up, 20 to 30% of a would-be tenant's income, whether you prefer the lower end model of Vienna or something even lower than that, or the US standard and something even beyond that. This will obviously benefit low-income workers the most, but will reap benefits for those whom have to just work and travel in close proximity to their homes at all. There's also occupancy requirements that could be mandated, where a residency or property has to be put to good use or occupied for a certain amount of time throughout the year, or it effectively goes up for grabs into the hands of the state, of the local community, or to a cooperative. There's also the option of limiting foreign investment as well as domestic saturation of ownership. In other words, limit the number of land and properties which can be leased and owned by a single party or affiliates, and heavily taxing each additional property until it's no longer profitable to do so. You have the options of, the Scientology cult, which has bought up, saying whole swaths of land across the country in the United States, as well as the influx of foreign investment, which has disrupted markets around the world for decades. There's also the option of limiting the number of properties which can be used for Airbnb and similar services. Now, again, this doesn't mean that these things have to be, put away. I don't feel as if they can, be completely cut off, nor should they. I just think that it's, we've seen enough damage and havoc being wreaked on these local communities, very small communities that have already had issues with, home ownership and affordable housing. So we got somebody being cute. Hello, can you address the flat earth on stream? Yeah, if the earth is really flat, then walk to the edge and take a picture or live stream that shit, and I'll give you all of my life savings. All right, all $13.72. It will be all yours. If you can prove that to me, truthway_. Otherwise, I hope you're enjoying the stream. And whatnot, and just, the supply of housing, that Airbnb, it's time to, take a cut, so to speak. Now, before we go to some of the hurdles into implementing these changes and some of the trade-offs, I also want to talk about the terms collective and cooperative, because I use them interchangeably throughout this video so far, but they are not interchangeable terms, and I want to make sure that people understand the different kinds of tenant arrangements. So firstly, there's collective. Now, collective, it just means any group of people who are motivated by a shared goal or interest. It can be very vague. It can be, saying more serious and whatnot. But it varies differently legally from a cooperative. A cooperative is an autonomous association of persons who voluntarily meet on their own economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned enterprise. Basically, you got to put your numbers up. You got to pool your resources. You got to take on that liability, take on that risk. You have to coordinate with all these different, factions and whatnot, and you have to achieve specific goals in order to justify your continued legitimacy. And the thing is, in each of these arrangements, what it comes down to is that instead of just giving our money to a landlord, the funds will be collected and pooled for any repairs or maintenance that needs to be done, and with some damages or modification having to be covered by the tenants themselves, which seems like a pretty reasonable arrangement. It's cutting out the middleman, the landlord, and also taking out the liability that they will take their money and, say, put it on their own mortgage and not keep your name in good standing, and then destroy your reputation and ability to rent for years later down the road. And also is that there are two different tenant arrangements that are used in divvying up land and property between two or more people. There's the tenant in common arrangement, and there's the joint tenancy arrangement. There are fundamental differences that need to be highlighted here. One is the tenant in common arrangement. There can be varying degrees of ownership. So if there's 4 people there, one person can own 50%, and then the other 50% is distributed between those other 3. In a joint tenancy arrangement, everybody's ownership is split equally, no ifs, ands, and buts about it. All those 4 people get 25% apiece. And then there's the what happens to the ownership upon one's death. In a tenant in common arrangement, whoever is operating your estate or is the designated heir in your will, they will get your ownership of the property or the land, which could also be the other owners in that arrangement. In a joint tenancy, however, if you die, then your ownership will automatically be transferred to the other tenant with no question. And then lastly, a tenant in common arrangement, a force of sale can be done by a single tenant. So if the 50% stakeholder from that first example earlier decides they want to sell their full 50%, they can do that without needing the approval of the other members. It doesn't disrupt the arrangement that the other 3 had, and they can continue to go along with that arrangement with themselves or whoever else is signed on to the contract later if they let anybody in. In a joint tenancy, the sales must be agreed on by all parties, even if only one person wants to initiate it. The arrangement is effectively, the contract is effectively null and void, and if those same people want to continue doing business, or if those same four people want to do business again in the same way, they have to sign a whole new contract and go through all the legalese all over again to get that done. Now, as we're trying to implement changes to any form of system, there's going to be pushback, there's going to be resistance, and some of the hurdles that come to my mind in implementing some of these much needed changes in addressing homelessness and affordable housing, there's the continued existence of shell corporations, offshore banking, tax loopholes, as well as the general non-enforcement of laws for the privileged, for those who have enough wealth, resources, or connections to be able to skip out on their taxes, not give their fair share, and continue to keep us in this very one-sided arrangement where they continue to just make money off of our labor, and we are carrying the burden more and more and more, for taxes and supporting, infrastructure and whatnot. There's also a lack of engagement as well as a general ignorance or lack of literacy, I should say, from the general public. It has been increasing over years, but we've also seen is the extreme polarization and the extreme, diversions that people take in this path of becoming, enlightened or more informed. It's not always as simple as just exposing people to all the different information that's available and allowing them to find their best way, to that same endpoint. Some people's end goals are completely contrary to that of other people's end goals. And we have to deal with those differences head on. There's also basic human impulses like greed, apathy, favoritism, laziness. These collide with more dangerous ideas and preferences like racism, sexism, Islamophobia, homophobia, which can translate into exploitative housing practices as well as many other runoff social ills. Another one is political and cultural ideology, as well as, actual perseverance, actual willpower. Because in addition to, having conservatives and the right wing in general not really supporting, saying government intervention in things like jobs programs and food programs and expanding voting rights, they most often work to do the opposite. There is also a lack of real willpower, real integrity in many of the mainstream Democrats. Now, they are not one and the same. Democrats have their issues. The mainstream Democrats and liberal parties have their issues, but they have overwhelmingly been spending more of their time, trying to expand voting rights, expand access to health care, and whatnot. But when it comes to really tackling and untying those bonds to corporate lobbying and, a lot of those perks, a lot of the pork and whatnot, they can be just as guilty in that respect. But let it not be said that they are ever exactly one and the same. Having overlapping, ideas or overlapping practices, or finding a common ground and agreement with somebody you usually disagree with does not mean that you are just forfeiting all your values and understanding. This is just the complexity of human life, of human ideology and experiences. And then there's more external issues like raising the minimum wage and providing a universal basic income, improving the healthcare system by either introducing a two-tiered system or full government subsidized, which would be the most progressive in the world. There's also legal and administrative disputes that inevitably are going to come down and continue for decades, as well as raising the general literacy and engagement of the public at large and getting them on the same path instead of letting everybody just kind of find their own truth, as well as many other factors. So that basically summarizes my feelings about rent control. Okay, so that summarizes... So yes, just like I said, I'm kind of summarizing my feelings at that point. And then the last thing that I talk about is more of general observations about capitalism, about the concept of landlords, and really a lot of the failings that I see within left-wing and progressive circles in the way that they talk about these issues. It's in a very narrow way. It's very definitive prescriptions for how to do shit that without the context of how these programs have played out, not knowing that some of these stones have already been unturned, and it feels like they're just trying to recreate the wheel without actually taking any lessons from those who have created wheels before them. So let me go ahead and skip ahead. I want to get more to this other discussion. Completely different than the concept of saying, no, we don't want these people here at this same opinion. And it's because I understand the difference between, say, abolish the police, and in exchange for that rent, the landlord is supposed to provide positives. And with that in mind, I now want to shift the conversation on to talking about landlords and capitalism, and really just kind of giving my own feelings and observations about how these different mechanisms or policies function within or without these systems in place. And just to clarify the definition of landlord that I'm having in mind right now, I am thinking of a landlord as being a property and or landowner who is typically rent seeking or leasing out that property in exchange for rent. And in exchange for that rent, the landlord is supposed to provide hospitable and safe living conditions or operating conditions, depending if it's a residential or commercial property, addressing repair and maintenance issues, settling disputes between tenants, and clearly documenting issues and expectations in the lease agreement, as well as paying taxes and insurance on the properties and land, of course. So in left-wing and progressive circles, you're likely to hear the phrase thrown around a lot that all landlords are scum. In addition to, phrases like ACAB, which are said nearly as often, or all cops are bad. And what these phrases are meant to imply is not so much that each landlord is individually scum or that each cop is individually bad, respectively, but that operating within these systems, which many will describe as inherently discriminatory and irredeemable, that you can only do evil, even if you're the most kind-hearted and decent law-abiding person in your downtime. Now, I don't share this same opinion, and it's because I understand the difference between, say, abolish the police and defund the police. With defund the police, there should be less access to military gear. Yes, there should be, qualified immunity. Get rid of that. You can't just, get away with whatever you want and just say qualified immunity because of some, very authoritarian fascists' interpretation of, saying police privilege or law enforcement privilege. And so this is definitely a much more recent addition. So I guess that there's a player called the Billionaire. They give no money. Adjacent Cheese and Wine, they give twice as much coins, and they give 35 coins when destroyed. And I guess that the guillotine, wait, that's not how it goes. Guillotine! That's what it does. Yeah, that's hilarious. It's a goofy looking guillotine. And then not calling law enforcement officers into every social dilemma that presents itself. Saying funding, saying mediators, funding, different programs that will help alleviate the social pressures which lead to these situations in which people feel like they have to call cops. The thing is that I still believe in enforcement of laws and values and morals, and that there are certain boundaries that need to be kept in keeping a society functioning, and that not everybody is supposed to be happy all the time. There are going to be times when you're going to want somebody who can escalate a situation to the degree that, we see cops doing. It's just that it's happening too often to people who don't deserve it. But anytime we see somebody, we see the anti-fascist clashing with the fascist, don't lie to yourselves and say that you are not looking to see fascists get punished in any way, possible, whether it's street justice or actually going through the court of law. Let's not pretend. If you feel that way and you can be honest with yourself, then you have to acknowledge that you do believe in law enforcement. You just don't like how the policies are currently enacting, who the laws are favoring or who they're not favoring, and the damage that's being done to communities as a result. But that is completely different than the concept of saying, no, we don't want these people here at all, completely abolish them. I don't agree with that. And it can be said that these phrases, while being very effective sloganeering, are still cringy as fuck. But it can't be denied that they do capture the righteous anger that is felt in many cases of individual landlords or corporate interests and foreign investors who are throwing people out on the streets for missing their rent or mortgage by as little as $1 or foreclosing on them, and otherwise refusing to provide adequate and affordable housing in the quality or quantity in which it's needed, but still profiting from the arrangement because they fully captured our government and cultural figures. Overall, I believe in heavily regulated private ownership and enterprise. And just like there's no guarantee that the government or a collective is going to be morally righteous or adhere to the rule of law, I also don't believe there's any guarantee that private interests will automatically do something evil and antisocial. These are negative human traits that, yes, can be incentivized depending on the systems in which they're operating in, but the potential for anyone to express these things depends on who they are as individuals in addition to the external conditions. Because to go back to those 4 countries that I've used, throughout this whole video, Germany, Austria, Singapore, Chile, all of them have had to deal with fascist, neoliberal, right-wing authoritarian disruptions to their entire system for decades, having to pick up the pieces, and none of them are even close to being what you would call a democratic socialist, communist, or, anarchist, saying paradise. And yet they have managed to implement policies that haven't even been successfully done in countries with way more resources, with way more clout, that are supposed to be more modernized, more industrialized, and whatnot, right? Because it all comes down to, again, not just the systems in which you operate, but also the willpower and the individual vision of those who are trying to push through these different programs and whatnot. I just cannot accept this premise that I hear in left-wing and progressive circles, that capitalism will be defeated, or that it even should be defeated, and that most people will then automatically become more cooperative or agreeable, or that these negative traits won't just manifest themselves in other means. Yes, disincentivize the ability to profit by exploiting these different traits and in this manner, but don't think that they're going to be going anywhere. Alienation, greed, and all the other negative traits that I referred to throughout this video are human things. And somebody who's going to manifest these behaviors is not being influenced by some brainwashing or some, evil that is unique to them or unique to their time. Fuck. It is a human impulse, and different people will latch onto it in different parts of their lives, depending on how things go. It's never going to stop. Also, while I believe that housing is a human right just as much as food and clean air or water or even internet access is, and that we have enough resources to provide this to every person in the country with surplus, I also don't believe that housing should be 100% decommodified. The function of markets in theory and in general is to provide a means of catering to different preferences and interests of consumers, and that allowing this conspicuous consumption provides capital which can be redirected towards projects decided by local, state, or federal institutions. Full 100 decommodification sounds nice, but there's trade-offs to every system. And the first thing that comes to my mind is how, the USSR, how, effectively the attempt to implement some type of socialism or communism in Stalin's Russia and in the Soviet bloc and Eastern Europe and everything, it was bungled by a lack of innovation in productivity and being able to get up the numbers enough where they could, literally outbuild and outpace the United States and, the UK. At a certain point, it's just a numbers game, in the same way in which China has been able to supersede the United States and many other, Western powers, by implementing the same measures. This is how the game goes. And so, at a certain point, you need to put numbers on the board. You got to keep your productivity up. And guess what? Markets are a tried and true, method of doing this, as long as they are, boxed in correctly and the benefits are actually being allocated to those whom they're supposed to be going to. Also, and this is kind of one of the last things, it's easy to think about these hypothetical scenarios where everything goes good. And again, in these circles, when I hear, saying plans about, how to change things, there's rarely, if ever, any notice and acceptance of the fact of the negative trade-offs or negative potentials of, saying changing things up, of having a revolution. For example, this isn't so much with a revolution, but more sticking to the housing issue and dealing with other residents. If you are in a building and it's shared amongst you and a bunch of, people, some friends, some strangers or whatnot, right? And somebody stops paying their rent, whether it's for a specific demand or it's from financial hardships, at what point do you decide that your bias is going to affect your judgment in allowing that person to continue on with that arrangement or ending the arrangement? I know that this is really like a granular point, but it is something that's worth discussing, and it's not something that I hear brought up enough. Or another one is that what if a tenant is engaging in behavior that is, while not explicitly evil, is something that's rubbing people the wrong way and is maybe bringing some negative consequences or negative attention to the community? At what point do you decide that, okay, we're going to kick them out, or we don't have enough support from the community? It hasn't been decided democratically, but you may need to go around that and say, hey, just call the police, call the law enforcement, call the government and whatnot. And it will be an unpopular decision that is ultimately going to have positive consequences for most people involved. you know, again, this is very granular, but when discussing these systems and discussing the potential for change, we can't just talk about the ways in which stuff now isn't working and the way in which our ideal systems would be the best things, you know, saying around. We have to acknowledge both sides. What are the ways in which the system right now is working and also not working? And in what way can our potential idealized program, you know, saying be more productive or be more negative? Simple as that. At the end of the day, people are petty, people are complacent, people are short-sighted, and people look for advantages wherever they can find them. Call me a rad lib, call me a champagne socialist, you know, saying call me, you know, whatever. I don't care. You know, I don't care about what the, you know, the next cool, you know, saying leftist or progressive coping mechanism is being used to justify them not participating in these systems or not addressing the contradictions or shortcomings of their ideology, because it's going to create too many, you know, saying disruptions to their worldview and who they think themselves to be. Overall, I believe in some level of decommodification in markets such as housing, food, water, and utilities, but also smarter regulations of these goods and services in general, as well as raising taxes on speculators and hoarders of wealth, land, and resources. Whatever you want to call that, that's what I believe. All right, so thanks for listening, y'all. This has been Samboy, and this was my video on rent, landlords, and capitalism. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Yep, so that's basically it. That's the video. That's my end screen. So if y'all want to see the bits that were not included in that, I suggest going on to YouTube. If you just want to listen to the full audio stream, it's also available everywhere you stream. Apple, Google, Spotify, of course. Yeah, check me out. So that's that, and I'm actually pretty fucking tired right now. I'm high, I'm drunk, and I was already pretty tired from last, just not that I did anything last night, but it's just been a really super busy work week. You know, so that was my first stream. I think I'm gonna go ahead and end it there and just let that be what it is. And you know, yeah, we'll see. We'll do some more of these in the future. I was just trying to get used to this format and you know, how everything is arranged. And I think I found but I think I found a model that really works for me, and I'll be doing more of this in the future. So talk to y'all later. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. Hope y'all enjoyed the game, and yeah, we'll see what's up with y'all later. Peace.